Hi everyone, I'm John from Sophos and welcome to this short video where we'll be looking in more detail at Synchronized Security. I'm very excited to be able to deliver this content to you for two key reasons. The first is that Synchronized Security is one of my favourite topics, and also Synchronized Security is something which is very unique within the marketplace. So if you're not familiar with the concept, Synchronized Security is a mechanism that we have integrated into many of our products, and it allows them to share meaningful security data with each other and also to respond automatically when incidents occur. And it gives us a number of advantages. First of all, if you imagine the old world where we had multiple different products from multiple different vendors, for example, your endpoint protection from one vendor, your firewall from somewhere else, and so on and so forth, there's no opportunity for those products to work together harmoniously as a system. They're all working in isolation, and it means from the attacker's perspective that it could become quite easy to circumvent one of these levels of protection. It also makes it more cumbersome from a management point of view. You've got all of these different products, each with their own management dashboards, and you need to become an expert in configuring all of these different technology areas. If, however, you look at the alternative of synchronized security, the advantages become very clear. First of all, we're unifying the management of all of these different products in a single place. Sophos Central. So you only need to learn one management console, and then there's the opportunity to configure policies that work across multiple different product areas. It also means as well that we don't even necessarily need to rely on the management console in order to be able to carry out certain actions. So, for example, if an endpoint detects some form of compromise, it can communicate that to the firewall so that the firewall can automatically isolate our infected endpoint and also tell the rest of the system that that device in particular has a problem and should be treated with an element of skepticism. These kind of integrations mean that we can respond very, very quickly to an incident. We reckon on average in a typical network, it may take somewhere between 3 and 4 hours to find an infected endpoint, to isolate it and clean it up. Whereas the alternative with synchronized security means that we can detect the device that has some sort of issue, isolate it, and then initiate the cleanup process and have that device back into health and back into operation extremely quickly, maybe within just a few seconds. It means in a world where IT is increasingly challenged and resources and budgets are not available, that synchronized security offers real advantages when it comes to return on investment for security technologies and just leaves organizations in a far better place when it comes to cybersecurity. Here's the agenda we'll be covering today. We're going to begin with a synchronized security demonstration with a simulated attack, and then we'll look at how you can create the policies in order to leverage the kind of controls that you'll see in that demonstration. We'll look then very quickly at lateral movement protection before moving on to bringing it all together with a demonstration using real malware. Then we're going to move on to a different feature of synchronized security, which is synchronized application control. We'll see how to configure synchronized application control so that your endpoints can share information with your firewalls about applications. And then we'll see a demonstration of this working in reality, before finishing up with looking at how we can use those application signatures practically on our firewall, and also how we can use those application signatures to generate reporting. This video is about 21 minutes in length, and there is a much shorter 8-minute video which just goes through a demonstration of the security heartbeat capabilities if you're a little bit pushed for time. Okay, so let's have a look at the product dashboard, and in this section I'm going to show you two specific features of synchronized security: the security heartbeat and the synchronized application control. And we're going to start out by looking at the security heartbeat, and you can see that we have two endpoints that are connected. You can see that they're none at risk, which would actively indicate some kind of compromise. There are no missing heartbeats where devices may have had their protection disabled, and there are no warnings at the moment. Now, warnings indicate things like the presence of potentially unwanted applications. So we have two devices connected, both exhibiting a green heartbeat. Now, if I hop over to a protected endpoint machine, you can see I'm busy browsing a particular online store. And really what I'm doing here is illustrating internet access available. Now what I'm going to do is visit the Sophos test site, and I'm going to trigger off a simulated alert of a call home. So this is a piece of malware on the device itself calling back to a command and control network. And you can see that as soon as I launch that simulation, the endpoint detects that immediately. And if I hop over to the XG management console, you can see that we now have one device which is in a red heartbeat, indicating that device is at risk. Now, if I open up that dialog in a little bit more detail, you can see that the endpoint is providing the firewall with a lot of information regarding this particular issue. So we can see, for example, the device's host name as well as its IP address, and we can also see the user which is currently logged into this device. Now, it's also worth mentioning that you would get a similar alert inside Sophos Central as well. Okay, so what practical implications has that had to the end user? So you can see, first of all, that they've got that warning, but if we try to go back and browse a different site, then you can see that that connection is being blocked. And that's because the firewall is actually blocking those connections out to the internet. And you can see with the warning screen here, that internet access is being blocked because the device doesn't meet the security status requirements, and that's because it has a red heartbeat. Now, how we actually achieve that level of control is through the firewall policies. So if we go to the firewall policies, and you can see that in this particular policy, I've specified that the minimum security heartbeat status has to be green. And obviously, as soon as that device ends in a red state, then it means that that device is no longer meeting the requirements for this particular firewall policy. So just like any other condition with a firewall policy, because it doesn't match, then the rule is being skipped, and it means that the device is no longer allowed access. It's worth mentioning as well that you can not only control the source heartbeat, but you can also create rules that are based around the destination heartbeat. So, for example, if you've got a server which is running Sophos protection, you could prevent clean clients from connecting through to it because the destination may be infected in some way. It's worth also mentioning that we offer lateral movement protection as well within Sophos Central. And what that covers is multiple devices connected to the same network segment that are communicating with each other without actually passing traffic through the firewall. So using those capabilities, if a device becomes compromised, all the other devices in the network segment will be told not to communicate with that particular device, thereby preventing the spread of things like ransomware, which are normally pretty good at being able to recognize other potentially vulnerable hosts and spreading themselves and propagating around the network very, very quickly. Now, that's not actually configured in the firewall because, of course, that traffic isn't going anywhere near the firewall, but it uses a lot of the capabilities of the firewall in conjunction with the power of Sophos Central. And it's just a really good illustration of how cybersecurity works better as a system. Okay, so that all sounds great in theory, but what we're going to do now is see how that all comes together to respond to a real world incident. So what we're going to do is look at this Sophos protected endpoint, which you can see is healthy based on the big green tick here. We know this device is currently in a healthy state. And what we're going to do is open up the user's emails, typical workflow, of course, when you arrive at work in the morning. And our first email is a newsletter from a popular theme park. And what we're going to do is just click on there, just really to verify that we have internet access. And you can see that that is absolutely fine. The next email down is a link to a file share internally. Now, this might be a server which is actually on the same network segment as our endpoint. So the traffic isn't going anywhere near the firewall, but you can see that we still have access to that server locally. And then what we're going to do is look at the next connection down, which is a invitation to an Rdp connection, which happens to be one of those sales dashboards, one of those overhead monitors that you might see somewhere like a call center. And again, what we're going to do is click on the invitation there and go through to the Rdp link. And you can see that we have access to that dashboard. And it turns out that the company seems to be doing pretty well, which is good. However, things are about to take a slightly sinister turn because our next email down, well, it appears to be a message from the HMRC indicating a tax refund, but of course, I'm sure the astute amongst you will realise that this is actually a phishing attack. However, our user is not so astute and is going to make all the mistakes that they can and activate the content inside there. And what you can see is InterceptX detecting the ransomware that they've invited into the network and shutting it down. You can also see behind a big red exclamation mark, and that's indicating that the security heartbeat status has changed because InterceptX has detected that ransomware. And you can also see, if we go to the firewall, that is being detected by the firewall. And you can also see that the information being shared with the firewall, including things like the user's name, their IP address, and all that kind of useful information, which makes it so much easier to find an infected endpoint. However, without any administration intervention, we can see that this has already had some effects on the user's access. And you can see if we go back to the user's inbox and try and click through on those links again, that the firewall is now preventing that access. If we also look at that file share, you can see that that access is also being blocked, and that may well be because Sophos Central has told the server to reject connections from this particular user. The same is also true of our Rdp connection as well. Now, in the background, Sophos Central, in conjunction with the endpoint, is busy cleaning up this infection, and if we wait around long enough, we'll see that red exclamation mark return back to a green tick. And what's happening now is the heartbeat is now green again, so all of that access that we previously had blocked is now being restored. So if we want to go back online, we can do that. If we want to access those file shares, for example, we can do all of that. But do bear in mind that all the time where this device was potentially compromised, all of that access was being blocked. Okay, so if we go back to the management console, the other feature that I wanted to show you was the synchronized application control. Now, this is a very powerful feature which is designed to help learn new applications that are seen on the network by getting intelligence off a Sophos protected endpoint. And this is a particularly useful feature because a large proportion of network traffic is typically unclassified, because signatures often change and underlying applications change their nature, and it means it's very difficult to just use the firewall alone to classify applications. So what happens is every time an endpoint launches an application out to the internet, the firewall will immediately try and cross-reference that against applications that it already knows about. However, if it doesn't find a match, then it can use the synchronized security mechanism to actually request more information from that endpoint. And that endpoint can share lots of useful information like the process name and often the nature of the application itself, so that the firewall can learn that signature. And then obviously once we've got that signature on record, then we can use it within our policies and also our reporting. So for example, if we see an application that we don't want to see on our network, we can put rules in place to restrict it or to block it. Conversely, if it's an application which is business critical, for example, then we can actually use policies to give it the bandwidth that it requires in order to give the users the very best experience. So let's go back to the management console and let's have a little look at how we configure synchronized application control. And you can see that we've discovered one new application. And if we open that up, we can see the application is Python. And we can see more information about the path associated with that application, and we can see which endpoint has launched that application as well. We can see the number of occurrences, and then we can choose to customize that application if we want to. So you can see that the endpoint is classified, in this case, that this is a general business application. But if we wanted to change, for example, the name of this application to something which is more meaningful to us, then we can do that. And if we decide that we want to change the classification of this particular app, we can drop it into a different category if we wish. Okay, we can also look back at applications that we've previously discovered and classified. And you'll notice here that some of those applications drop into the sync app control discovered. This is a category which is intended for applications that have been found that the firewall can't classify automatically. And that's basically just a prompt for the administrator to drop that into a more appropriate category. What you may also see here is, on the face of it, some applications which are fairly commonplace and you would expect them to be classified, but what may well have happened is those applications, the developers may have changed them, they may have changed the characteristics of those applications to a point where those signatures no longer match. And what's happening here is the synchronized application controller is detecting that application and then automatically classifying it and changing the signatures that we have on record. That's a really great way of keeping the firewall up to date with the constant world of changing applications. Okay, so what we're going to do next is bring all of this together and look at an imaginary school environment. And here in the XG, you can see my gaming policy. So I've created a policy to say that gaming is blocked, and I have applied that to a firewall policy that all of my users are subject to. So in other words, we shouldn't be seeing any gaming on this network at all. Now, a little bit like a magician who's about to do a magic trick, I just want to show you that there's nothing up my sleeve. So if we go back to the application control widget, you can see that there are no newly discovered applications in here that have anything at all to do with gaming. So I'm not cheating and I've not pre-trained this XG in any way, shape or form. Right, okay, so with that out of the way, what we're going to do is fire up an online game called Hedge Wars. And what I'm going to do is create a chat room, and I'm going to invite some virtual opponents into my room. Now, do bear in mind, of course, that we shouldn't be seeing any gaming, and yet things seem to be going really well here because the XG doesn't know about this particular game. So we can get ourselves online and we can play our game very easily. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with the gameplay for very long because frankly it isn't stellar, but what I'm doing is just generating enough network traffic so that the firewall can find it. And if we go back to the XG, we can see that we've just discovered a new application called hedgewars.exe, and you can see that in this case, the firewall wasn't able to classify for itself, so it's gone into the Sync App Control Discovered section. Now, if I pop that into my search engine of choice, then I can very quickly find out that that's a game. And of course, I don't want to see any gaming on my network. So what I'm going to do is drop this newly discovered application into the gaming category. And from then on, this newly discovered signature is subject to all the rules and policies that we have in place around gaming. So if I go back to my endpoint and try this process again, you'll see that the results now are very much different. So if I try and create a chat room, what I can't do is I can't invite any of the opponents in, so I can't pick up these objects and move them because the underlying network traffic that I need to get out to the internet is now being blocked by the firewall. And we can actually see the firewall blocking this traffic. So if I close down Hedge Wars and go to the log viewer on the XG, and what I'm specifically interested in is, of course, the application filter logs. Oh, there's Hedge Wars crashing in the background because we've cut it off on the internet. Eventually it keels over and dies. But what you can see behind is application traffic from this source IP address in my network going to the outside world on that IP address is being blocked because it matches the signature of Hedge Wars. So what you've seen there is me exposing the XG to a new application signature, classifying that application, and then immediately being able to use it in things like policies and reports. So it really is as simple as that to keep on top of newly discovered applications in your network. Now let's have a look at some of the ways that we can use these application signatures practically. So here, for example, I've got an application filter rule, and here are the applications that are already subject to that particular rule. And what I can do is search for additional applications in here as well. So we can look based on all these different categorizations that we have in the appliance already. So I could look for general business, for example. And I can choose to allow or block the applications that I find. What we can also do is go to the Sync App Control Discovered applications. Now remember, these are applications that the firewall and endpoint between them couldn't work out for themselves. And what you could do here is create a policy to block these automatically. And what it means is all of those applications need to be verified by an administrator before they're allowed on the network. So it's a really good level of control if you're looking to only allow vetted and certified applications to flow through your network. So what we'll do now is finish up this session by looking at some of the things that you can do with these application signatures. So we've already talked about being able to guarantee bandwidth to business critical applications and to suppress bandwidth to applications that maybe aren't that productive. But of course, you can also use the reporting to understand more about the nature of application usage across the organization. So what we're going to do here is hop into the product dashboard, and you can see there's a section here on applications, but we can get more information by clicking through to the reporting section, and we can open up the traffic dashboard, and you can see this will show us the information about application usage across our organization. So which applications are most popular, which users are utilizing those applications, for example. There is also the security dashboard as well. The security dashboard shows application usage based on risk. So Sophos apply a level of risk between 1 and 5 to applications, and you can see how risky the application usage is across your organization. And this helps to identify applications that may be causing a potential security risk to your organization. Then application usage also forms a significant part of the executive report. So the executive report basically summarizes all of the key information from the firewall to a single place. And here you can see that if we scroll down just a little way, we can find out things like application categories and the applications themselves, which applications are the most risky. And again, all of this is consolidated down into a single report that you can choose to export in various different ways. And you can also schedule this report out for automatic delivery. necessary. And of course, do bear in mind, all of this is reporting on the appliance itself, as opposed to the Sophos Central powered report that I've covered in a different video. So we've seen a lot in this section about integration between the endpoint and the firewall, but of course there are lots of other synchronized security use cases as well. So what I would strongly suggest that you do is take some time to look at the synchronized security web pages at sophos.com so you can understand all of the different use case scenarios that we have. But that's all for synchronized security for now. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I hope to see you again very soon.